Hello, everybody. It's time for our webinar. My name is Wilton Risenhoover. Um, I'm the creator of Fintel, and I will be your host today, giving the demo. Um, this is going to be about, we have it up to an hour, but it might not take an hour. I think the last time I did this, it was only about half an hour or so. The way it's going to work is I'll give a little demo, and I'll kind of walk you all through the kind of the basics of using the stock screener, and that's the subject today, the stock screener on Fintel. And then, if you all have questions, put them in the chat window here. For some reason, my it's hard for me to see the Q&A, and I think it's probably just due to my lack of knowledge of how to see that while I'm doing a screen share. But I can actually see the chat panel here. And just a quick check in. You all can hear my audio, right? You guys can see me. Can you put that in the chat just to make sure that we're all good here? Okay, great. Okay, so without any further delay, let me go ahead and start sharing. Get my machine set up here. We were going to go here, and I got to go to share screen. Only host. Quick here. What are we doing here? Share screen. Okay. Okay. You should be able to see my screen now. Is that right? Let me see if I can pull up the chat again. Chat. Okay, great. Okay. So I can see my screen, I can see you guys in the chat, and I will go ahead and get started. I'd like to start up every webinar with a real simple demo on how to add stuff to your dashboard and how to delete stuff from your dashboard, simply because it seems to be a very common question. This is my dashboard. Don't take anything on my follow list as an endorsement, obviously. But if you want to add tickers to your dashboard, you can just type the tickers in here. I'm going to put GE here, and you can see that GE shows up. And now I'm following it. If I want to delete GE from my dashboard, I can come down here to my stock lists, which is kind of what this is. I can see that I have a follow list, which is your default stock list. It's basically like a watch list. If you type something into that ticker list, it's going to add it to your follow list. And if you want to remove it, you can just come over here and you click on the X, and it will go away. You can organize your stocks by creating new lists, and you can add, tickers to this if you like. And that's kind of how you can organize these things. When you go back to your overview and your dashboard, you can then sort by your follow lists. And it should show you all of the lists that you have stocks for. And I'm not quite sure why it's doing this for me, but I think it's probably a caching issue. I'll take a look at that later. Anyway, this is kind of how, and then we have this alerts page. You can sign up for alerts. You'll get email alerts and so forth, but this is a page that we're building that allows you to see all of your alerts on one page. We're putting a lot of effort into this because I don't believe that email alerts are as effective as people like, and it's hard to manage a lot of emails. You can get your news, you can get your SEC filings and so forth. So that's how to add multiple to the follow list. It's a good question. You can put multiple tickers in right here, actually. Okay. Now I understand there's a lot of people that have added a lot of tickers. We don't have a way to remove a bunch at one time. You can actually go to your stock list and delete a stock list, and it will remove all the tickers as well. So if you have to do like a mass delete of a stock list, that's how you can do it. But there's no way to delete a whole bunch of them at a time yet. We've had a couple of people ask about that. It's something that we have on the schedule, on the engineering schedule, but we're not done with that yet. So that's the kind of how you manage your dashboard. Okay, so moving right along. The stock screener is something that I have worked on for a very long time, and the history of this is that I was satisfied with the screeners that were available to me when I was learning how to invest. And if those of you who have followed, the Warren Buffett and Bill Graham and the Intelligent Investor type books and literature, would remember that there is a famous formula that Benjamin Graham promoted called the net current asset value strategy, which basically he said he would look at the assets of a company. He would say, let's take the current assets and let's subtract all the liabilities. And if it's, if it's less than the market cap of the company, then it would be a really great deal to invest in. This was kind of his investment strategy. Well, if you think about that criteria, you take the assets, the current assets minus the liabilities, and compare it to the market cap. It's hard to kind of do a screen or a filter or something like that using a kind of a standard drop-down stock screener that's available to people on most places, on most sites. And so I started thinking about how can I find companies that meet this criteria. And so I went ahead and I started thinking about the problem, and I realized that there was an opportunity here. There's a way to do this a little bit better. So if you look at this line 2 here, you can see that this is basically a version of that. He would say, take the current assets minus the liabilities. And he would take a margin of error. So I think he said 60% of the market cap. But this is basically that, famous net formula popularized by Benjamin Graham. The key difference here, the key kind of differentiator for this stock screener is that you can actually put variables on the left and on the right of the conditional. So we're comparing a financial attribute formula with another financial attribute. And what happens here, let's clean some of this out. So that's not so confusing. Let's just take a look at this one. If you take a look at this one line here, what we're doing is we're going to go through what the stock screener does is that it goes through every company, and it applies this formula to every company that it has. And for any company where I will say every equation here on this in this formula is true, then it will allow that company through the filter and then display it to you here on the results page. So essentially what I'm saying is that if you take a look at each of these expressions, they all have to be true in order for the stock screener to allow the company to be shown. So the question is, how do you condition for New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ only? I think what you're asking for here is something like this. Since there are 4 exchanges in the United States, there's the New York Stock Exchange, there's the NASDAQ, there's the AMX, and there's the OTC. The equivalent to what you're asking for would be something like this. Okay. I don't have a way to do an or on a single line yet, but since these two are both ands, this should be the list. So how do you get the list of field names? So here's the terms here. I'm going to open this in a new tab. I'm not sure if the screen share will follow me through here, but here's the list of terms. Now I'm going to admit that this is not very helpful in a lot of ways because there's really no definitions. I'll answer this question in a second. This data, this is basically a work in progress. And I'm gonna walk you through some of these terms here in a second, some of the more interesting ones. Okay, but this is your list. And this list basically comes from kind of XBRL data. And I'll talk about the data that we have right now before I go any further. The data that we get, there's a couple kinds of data that we have. There's kind of market data. The market data is the pricing data, like what's the recent price or what's the price 6 months ago, that kind of thing. That's what I call market data. Then there's the financial data, which is, or the accounting data, which is like the balance sheet, the income statement, cash flow statement. We get our market data from a variety of sources, and I don't have any reason to believe that it's poor quality. We get market data for pricing data for the U.S. listed companies, and we also get pricing data we get end of day pricing data for most of the rest of the world as well. Now, this screener only handles U.S. stocks right now, and that's a deficiency that we're trying to solve. It was originally written, to solve my problem of trying to screen on accounting data. And so since I only had accounting data for the U.S., And that accounting data came from the SEC filings, XBRL SEC filings. The focus was really only trying to get that to work. Now, there's been a lot of people asking me about international stocks, and there's a lot of people that are interested in technical analysis. And so understanding that we do have that data, we're working on renovating the stock screener and opening this up to other countries with the limitation that we're not going to have accounting data for the Vietnam Stock Exchange. We do have ownership data for the Vietnam Stock Exchange. We do have pricing data for the Vietnam Stock Exchange. We can write formulas that will give you technical analysis like Bollinger Bands and so forth. And we're going to do that so that you can actually create screens for foreign companies, but you won't have the financial data that you have for the US. That's kind of what our goal is here in terms of coverage. Can the screener be accessed programmatically via Python? The answer, somebody else has asked that question before. The answer is not yet. We do have an API. Let me see if I can find this API. Developers.fintel.io I'll put this link in here for you guys. This is something that is a work in progress, and somebody has asked about that, to put an endpoint here that allows you to put a screen formula in here, and I think that the work would actually be trivial. And so I think that we would probably do that. We would allow somebody to say, here's the formula, and can you give me that back? Alternatively, one of the things that we allow people to do is we allow people to save screens. So you come in here and you put a screen and you put your formula in here, you can save it. And then we basically run that screen a couple times a day now. We were only running it once a day at first, and now we're running it probably 2 or 3 times a day, every I think 4 to 6 hours. We run all the screens that people save, and we update the results. And if you want to go look at the results, you can come over here and you can see the sample screens, and you can see that here's the dividend yield leaders. You can see that the last time this screen ran, it bought Progressive Insurance. So what this means basically is, you store your formulas. We run the screen. Any new companies that match that it didn't match before, we consider it a new buy, a purchase by the screen, by the strategy. And then we track the performance of that strategy over time. So you can see kind of it was flat, and then here was, this recent, market dive, and then now it's been recovering pretty well. So it's likely that, we can make this strategy results available via the API. That would be a lot easier, I think, programmatically, but that might solve the problem that you're asking for, rather than having to do a real-time screen using the screener. This might solve that problem. Is there data for TSP funds, which are government retirement funds for government employees? I think this question was asked elsewhere. I do recognize the question. We don't have that data. I looked for it. I found a fund called TSP, but I don't think it was the one that you were actually looking for. I think it was more of a hedge fund. So let's go back to the screener here, and let's get started on some actual kind of exercises. Each line here is an expression, and that means basically it needs to be kind of a Boolean. It needs to be a true or a false, right? So in this case, we have exchanges not equal OTC. This is a lot of people are asking how to get rid of this stuff. Now, I wrote this a long time ago. The tokenizer. I wrote this a long time ago, and it needs to be updated. And I've been trying to stuff new functionality into the screener without rewriting the tokenizer. And so one of the things that I discovered is that in some cases, especially with this exchange does not equal OTC, which is the most recent kind of addition to the screener, if you don't put spaces in here, it's going to act funny. So if you put an equation in here and it's acting funny, try to make sure you just put spaces in here just to kind of help it out a little bit. It's not very smart, so that might be something that's important to you. If I just click on get results here, you can kind of get a sense of like how it works. It's going to go through, it's going to chug through, the data. Now, the first time you run it, it might be slow because, we do a lot of caching, and the data's in the database. It's got to do a lot of math for a lot of these formulas, and then once it's done the math, it can cache the data. So as you kind of continue to use it in its session, then it's going to get faster and faster and faster. So if I cancel this, for example, and then get results again, you'll see it's going to be a lot faster the second time around, or at least it should be. And also, in addition to that, kind of the more formulas you have in here, the slower it's going to be. Now, in this case, I think I already talked about exchange does not equal OTC. You can add another one in here that says does not equal AMEX if you want, and filter out all of the exchanges you don't want. We're going to add, country equals US, or country equals China, or country equals, Vietnam, and to kind of help people get better coverage here. When we start adding technical indicators, you'll be able to see things like, if you want to check a moving average crossover, you could say SMA 50 is greater than SMA 100, right? So that will show you the 50-day simple moving average and the 100-day simple moving average. And when the 50-day simple moving average gets larger than the 100-day, then it will hit as a positive. Now, we don't have this yet, but this is kind of where we're going with this technical indicators. This is how you would find a moving average crossover. In the case of assets minus liabilities times 95, this should be pretty self-explanatory, right? We're taking the current assets denominated in dollars, and we're going to take minus the liabilities, and we're going to multiply it by this number and see if it's greater than the market cap. The question is, can we apply the screener for just one particular sector? Let's say energy. So yeah, the answer is no, not yet, but the answer will be yes. What I'm planning on doing is something like SIC equals is 6634 or 663 or something like that. We have all of the SIC codes for all these companies. The companies are required to report to the SEC with SIC codes. In fact, the SEC reporting organizations are organized by SIC, and so every filing that we get from these companies has their SIC, and so this is trivial for us to sort by, and so this is how we're going to do the screeners. We'll also be able to say we've taken the SIC codes and we've rolled them up into the major sectors. Let me just come over here real quick and go to the macro page, and you can see that we have market sectors, and we've done a lot of work on building. We're starting to work on building out macro indicators, and so here we can see we have each of the major sectors. In this case, our macro indicator is looking at sell buy ratios. This is kind of a nice segue into our insider data, which I think is pretty interesting. If you take a look at all the companies in the marketplace, and you look at all of the insiders in the last 90 days, and you count all the insiders that are selling, and you count all the insiders that are buying, and you divide the ones that are selling by the ones that are dividing, you get the insider sell buy ratio. Now, if an insider is selling, it means they probably have a negative sentiment. At least we treat it as a negative sentiment. And if an insider is buying, we treat it as a positive sentiment. And so the sell buy ratio, if it's high, it means it's a negative sentiment. And if it's low, it means it's good, right? So we're tracking this. So which color is which? The green is the ratio, and the blue is the actual price of SPY, which is the benchmark's S&P 500. So here's the whole market indicator right now. And then if you go down, you can get into the different sectors. You can see the energy sector it went from very low to very high. And so you were asking about sectors, and this is kind of why I got here, how I got here. We do have sector data on the companies, and besides doing the SIC codes, we should be able to add a sector formula or sector type, I guess is what I'm getting at, to the screener. Any questions about this? There's an interesting strategy, I guess. You could conceivably take a look at these sell buy ratios and use that as a data point if you wanted to invest, if you wanted to trade sector ETFs. But I think this is an interesting macro indicator, and I like it a lot. So going back to the stock screener, we're going to talk more about insider data here as well, because we've got other indicators that are not at a macro level, but at a stock level that are interesting. So, the market cap is greater than 100 million. So you can put in things like 100,000. We use a K for kilo. We can't use a T because that's a trillion, right? So we use 100. We use 100,000. We don't allow you to put a comma in here. I don't think this is going to work, so don't try the comma. But I prefer to do things like 100K, 100 million, 100 billion, or 100 trillion. I'm not even sure that trillion works, but it should work. But don't use T thinking that you're going to get 1,000. All right. Price is greater than 1. Here I've got no spaces in here, and I should put spaces in just because. This is we've got volume as well. You could say volume is greater than whatever. The volume number, we're not actually doing a lot of averaging. If you wanted to do a screen on volume, obviously what you would want to do is you would want to say, what is the 90-day average volume? I think the volume that we have right now just turns out the most recent. So it's not quite as useful. But notice here that I don't actually have an expression. I don't actually have a something like this. I just put the volume here. What this does is that it's just going to show you the results. So in many ways, this is almost kind of like a reporting tool, right? I can filter and I can report. I don't really want to filter out anybody that's got volume, but I do want to know what the volume is, and so I just add it here as a kind of a null expression, and it's always going to be treated as a true. And the revenue growth is greater than 5%. So, if I click on Get Results here, what you need to understand is that internally, what it does is it treats this 5% and it converts that to a 0.05. So internally, it thinks of this as a ratio, and it's going to return it back to you as a ratio. Now, this SIC equals 663 is causing us a little bit of a problem here. So let me take that out and let's get the results. So, any questions so far? We're at 9:22. Let me go over here to our terms here. And I'm going to show you guys some terms that are interesting. So the market data, we've got price, volume, PE ratio, shares float, shares, we've got beta. A lot of this stuff comes straight from our providers. Like I said, we have a lot of providers. The provider that we use for US market data is IEX. They're a new exchange. The ownership data, owner's count is a new one. We have a lot of ownership data in Fintel. If you've been to Fintel, you probably have come to look at ownership data. But we unfortunately don't have a lot of that data exposed in the screener, and I'm trying to fix that. If you're interested in finding companies that don't have a lot of owners, then you can do something like this. You can say, like if you're interested in finding small companies, you could say 2 billion, and I want to say owner's count is less than 100. Let's get rid of this guy, and let's get rid of this guy here. So this is a good way to find small caps that don't have a lot of owners yet. Let's put owners count is greater than 0. And this is really looking at the institutional ownership of these companies. And so this is a way you can go through and figure out. I've had a couple of people ask me about that. How do you find small companies that don't have a lot of ownership yet? So people want to get in before the institutions figure it out. Now there's going to be a way to be able to add like a growth to that as well. People have asked me about trying to compare current data to prior historical data, and it's a difficult problem to solve, but we're working on that. So it might be something where we say, owners count change or quarterly change, the number of owners would be, a certain number, and we can add that to the screener. The insider data is something that, like I said, is really interesting because, insiders, the SEC considers any named officer or a board member or a 10% owner an insider, and they're not disallowed from trading their shares as long as they don't have material non-public information. So if they know that they're not going to hit their earnings next quarter, then they're not allowed to trade on that information. But it turns out that a lot of insiders know or have a very strong feeling about what their company's going to do compared to their peers. And so, you know, watching insiders trades is actually really important. So we have a whole lot of information on insider data here, and I'm going to just quickly go over here to like Tesla. You know, you can see, for example, dollar volume of insider buying, net number of insiders buying. So the net number of insiders is -7, so that's pretty low. We actually provide you with a ranking. So Tesla is one of the worst in the entire universe right now for insider buying. It's actually a lot of insider selling going on right now, which might suggest, you know, obviously I'm not going to go on record saying something is true or false, but it might suggest that, you know, the insiders feel like this is a good time to be selling their shares. 10b5 filing means that this is part of an automatic trading plan. So we actually will show you that if you remember. I feel like 10b5 plan trades are not as informative as non-10b5-1 plans. So you can go through here and you can see, you know, who's selling in 10b5, who's not. But there's a lot of insider selling going on in Tesla these days, looks like. But you can go back here to the stock screener and you can actually see that. One of the things that's interesting that we have, and this is we actually look at the percent of float bought by insiders. And so this is something that I've worked very hard to get right. When you're trying to compare companies, apples to apples or oranges to oranges, or however you like to do it, you know, you just can't compare the dollar volume because, you know, some companies might have a high share price. Some companies might have a lot of shares. You know, there's a lot of, you know, things that you have to take into account when you're trying to compare insider selling or insider buying from a company basis. The best approach to this, the best metric I have found that allows you to do an apples to apples comparison for a company's insider trading is to take the float, take the dollar, take the number of shares that have been bought or sold in the prior 90 days of a company. And so, and then divide that by the total float for the company. So in this case, if you look at this percent of float bought by insiders rank, the percent of, because this is negative, it actually means that 48.048% of the float was sold by insiders. And on a scale of 1 to 100, that ranks at the bottom 6.98%. That's what this means. So I'm going to say it one more time. Percent of float bought by insiders in the last 90 days for Tesla was -0.048%. Now, Tesla has a lot of float, right? And most of the shares are not owned by, probably not owned by insiders. They're owned by, you know, a lot of the public and a lot of institutions. So, you know, you got to, you know, compare this to others. But what this means is that 0.048% of the float was sold by insiders in the last 90 days, and that ranks at the bottom 6.9%. What you want here is if you're looking for something where insiders are accumulating, you want to find a number here that's 100. All of our rankings now, and I'm going to start building up more and more of these rankings, are going to be 0 to 100. And 100% is where you want to be. 100 is good, 0 is bad. It's actually starting to rain on me right now, so I'm going to have to do something here real quick. Unfortunately, I'll see if it goes away here for a second, but I might have to stand up and run real quick inside. The question is it possible to export the results to Excel? It's a good question. It's a very good question, and I can see why you want to do it. We don't have that yet. I'm going to work on that. One of the things that we do have issues with is that we're going to be licensing data. We're going to be licensing short interest data, and we're probably going to be licensing actual accounting data from a third party. I don't know who. We're getting our accounting data from the SEC right now, so there's no licensing restrictions. But a lot of the vendors that we're talking to don't allow downloading data, and so we have to kind of like thread that needle. But the idea of exporting results to Excel is something that a lot of people ask about. I don't see any real reason why we can't allow that to some extent. Obviously, we do have an issue with people trying to do full scale, you know, wholesale downloads of our entire database, and that's something that we don't particularly like. We have a lot of people that are trying to screen scrape the site to get the data. We don't like that. We put a lot of work into gathering the data, and we spend a lot of time trying to correct the data. And so, we like to be able to be paid for our work on that. So that's why we've built this API, and that's why we take a pretty hard stance against screen scrapers. But we have to figure that out. Thank you. Yeah. So that's kind of where we stand on that. We want to give you an API. We do recognize that people have programmatic needs for this, and we do recognize that. And so we've built an API, and we're always willing to add more endpoints to that, for personal use only. And there's some restrictions around that, but we want to help out when we can. So I hope I answered that question properly and to your satisfaction. Any other questions about this? I want to go back to the screener terms here, and I want to show you some of the things that we've got here. We've got short volume ratio. We've got short volume. We're going to add a ranking to this, so you're going to be able to see like which is there documentation for the screening. Well, I don't have a lot of written documentation for the screening. What I've got right now is I've got a bunch of YouTube videos where I've kind of done this, but this really is kind of it. And this is a big deficiency in our site and in our overall offering, and I recognize that. So there's not a lot of written documentation, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Let me keep going on this insider data here, because I want to show you some of the things that I think are interesting. The insider, where'd it go? Insider net buyer shares volume overflow. That's a big long-winded word. But what this means is that it's basically this factor right here on the screener. You're taking the total number of buyers, you're taking the total shares that the buyers have, and if the number is positive, then they're net buying, and if it's negative, then they're net selling, and you divide that over the float. So if I take this in here and I cut that and I say is greater than 0.1. Okay. Now, if I do this, this is actually 10%. You guys see that, right? So I'm going to put 0.01, and I'm going to say, just out of curiosity, let's see what this says. Can you screen 13Fs? So a 13F is basically a form that a fund has filed that has all of their ownership data in it. So owner's count uses the 13Fs as part of its data. I'm not sure if I understand what your question is. This is basically designed to provide you with a list of stocks and securities. And we do use 13F data in order to calculate this number, but I'm not sure what your results would be with a 13F. So refine your question here, and I'll see if I can answer it. But meanwhile, let's come back here to this results here. Inside our net shares of volume over float, this is returning us a number of results here. And the higher numbers are better. Now the question is, how can you have a 9.56? This is actually, over 100%. And I've looked at this quite a bit. And what I've found is that typically, so this is actually 16% here. This is 27%, okay? These are all, I believe very, very high numbers. And keep in mind that insiders are not just individuals, but they can also be funds, all right? So that's kind of how we get this. When I've looked into all of these situations where the percentage of float bought by insiders was over 100%, this is the case, what I've typically found was that there was some kind of merger or a reverse merger or some type of acquisition or something like that, where if you think about float is the total number of publicly available shares, and there's going to be shares that are available that are not publicly available, publicly traded, perhaps a treasury stock or something like that. And so if a company is doing an acquisition of another company, they're going to buy all the public float, and then they're going to buy all the publicly available shares. And so you're going to find situations where that percentage is greater than 100%. Okay, so the question is, can I find stocks bought or sold with certain criteria, such as where you put exchange name, could you put hedge fund name, et cetera, Citadel? So, okay, so it's an interesting question. This isn't the first time I've heard this. I might have heard this from you prior, but I have heard this a couple different times. I've put this in as a feature request, and I will see what we can do. Or like I said, we're going to be renovating, or we're going to be kind of overhauling the stock screener in the coming, say, weeks and months. And so I'll see if we can do that, because it certainly is interesting, and I'm always interested in finding functionality that we can provide that is interesting and differentiating and makes the site better. So I hear you're asking me, and we can't do it right now, but hopefully within the next couple months, we'll be able to have that in there. If anybody else is interested in that, let me know. And I can see how you would want to be able to do that, because right now we're just, you can go to Citadel here and you can see what they've bought and sold, but I can see how you would want to say, okay, if Citadel is an owner and then you want to be able to put other criteria on it, then that would be great. But most of the issue is that the tokenizer and the logic behind this is not that sophisticated yet. Sure, okay. Does 13F include the breakdown of the mutual funds, other funds that also invest in the company? So, okay, so this is a good question. The 13F data, we're getting a little bit off the screener here right now. So let me come back to this in a second. I hear what you're asking me, and I will see if I can answer that. Let me come back here to a little bit more of the screener terms, and then if we've got time, I'll come back to that. It's 9:37 right now. We've got about 25 more minutes. It's a good question. So I wanted to go through some of the top screening terms that I like. This one is a big one. The other one is insider net buyer count. If I say, for example, I want to find all of the people that are buying, where you've got at least 2 or more insiders buying. Well, the way that we calculate this is we look at the last 90 days, and we count all the people that are buying, all the insiders that are buying in the last 90 days, all the individual insiders that have bought shares, and all the individual insiders, or all the insiders who have sold shares, and we subtract them. So if one person is buying and 0 people are selling, then the number is 1. If 5 people have bought in the last 90 days, and 3 people have sold in the last 90 days, then the net insider buyer count is going to be 2. Okay, so there's some evidence, there's some academic research that says, the more people that are buying, then that's a positive sign. It's a positive sentiment indicator. So these 2 insider terms, I think, are probably some of the most useful screening terms that we have in regards to insider data. You can see here, this guy's got 7 insider buyers, and so it might be interesting to look at that. What else? The short volume ratio. I believe that rankings will be better, and so I'm going to work on a ranking here. This balance sheet data all comes straight from the XBRL. One of the issues that we have with XBRL data is that the SEC doesn't enforce. They have like loose terms, but there's a lot of variance in some of these, and this is one of the biggest complaints I have about this stock screener itself that I created, is that the data doesn't come normalized, and so you have some situations where cash and equivalents. We have cash here, but some companies report it as cash and equivalents, and some people report it as cash and equivalents, and so the numbers, so these terms, don't always match up, and it's a big problem, and so we're going to try to get around that by actually licensing data that is normalized. I have 5 tabs open. If we do likewise, do you cause performance deterioration for your service? Not really. If every person on the site went through the stock screen at the same time, then that would be an issue, I think. But that haven't really seen a lot of that. Average price at which buying takes place versus current price. I'm not quite sure what this question here is. Let me keep going through the screener terms here. We have share data. Again, this goes back to the same kind of issue that we had before. Common shares outstanding, weighted average number of, these all mean different things, but sometimes people report this and sometimes people report that. And so the shares is a term that we've created that tries to find the best of these, based on what they've reported. So I guess what I'm getting at here is if you went through and you knew what common shares outstanding was, or you went through and you knew what weighted average number of shares outstanding basic was, and you thought that every company in the United States disclosed this number, and you did a screen on this, then you would be disappointed because a lot of companies don't report this term, and if they don't report this term, they're not going to show up in your screen. And so that's kind of the issue that we have with the XBRL data, is that nobody has normalized these numbers. And so we do our best job with it, but you have to kind of really do your sleuthing on this. Okay. I think that's probably all. And I think it's the same thing here. It's like some people report earnings per share basic and some people report earnings per share diluted, but they don't always report both. Okay, so let me go back to this chat and see if I can answer your question. Does the 13F include a breakdown of the mutual funds? So what you're asking, let me see if I can get this straight here. If I go to the ownership data, and this is no longer a stock screener question, okay? This is kind of more of a data question. How do you find stocks where the average price paid by insiders is actually higher than the current price? That's a great question, and that came up in our own internal conversations the other day. We don't have that indicator in the stock screener, but it's something that I would like to add, and I actually plan on adding that. We have all the data in the database. It just needs to be exposed in the stock screener. That's a really, really great question, and it's a really, really great idea. And so I am going to commit to adding that as soon as possible. Okay, so you'll be able to have that soon. The question here, now let me go to this guy's question about the 13F data and the funds. The question is this: if I go take a look at the ownership, the institutional ownership, and this is kind of more of a philosophical question about ownership and how does it work? 13F data is filed by institutions that have more than $100 million in assets under management. Now, if I go through here, and that means there's a lot of companies like Vanguard and BlackRock and so forth that have to file these. Now, if I take a look at Vanguard, Vanguard Group here files a 13F, and you can see that it owns 42 million shares of Tesla, which is a lot. But the Vanguard Group is the parent company of all of these other mutual funds. And so what you find here is that, these small ETFs and mutual funds also have to report. And you find a lot of double counting in here, unfortunately. And so your question is could I click on Vanguard and see all of the kind of the sub funds that report to it? Because that's what you can see on Bloomberg. And the answer is no, you can't do that yet. And we're trying to work on that. We're trying to figure out a good way, besides just looking at the name, to correlate and to identify the fact that Vanguard Capital Opportunity Fund is a sub fund of the Vanguard Group. Now, it's easy for you and me to do this because we know what Vanguard is, but if you're a computer, you don't know what Vanguard is, then you can't simply just do that. And so we're looking at various ways to correlate these or to recognize that these are the same company, and to be able to dedupe these numbers here and provide more accurate numbers, and then to be able to show you basically a tree structure. I think that's what you're looking for, is a tree structure. So I would click on Vanguard and I would be able to see all the children there. That's something that's a good question. We don't have that yet. It's a great feature request though. I think I've answered all the questions that I understood here. So it's 9:44, we've got 15 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and show you a couple other things that Fintel does that maybe you didn't know. We have this thing called the Combined Portfolio Builder, where you can go in if you want to find, since you have an interest in Citadel and things like that. There's a lot of people that want to follow, that have an interest in multiple funds. And one of the things that we can do is we can kind of like build this intersection tool where, let's say you have, you've got 5 funds that you like to follow that you think are really good. Maybe it's like, you know, all the Tigers or something, or you've got 5 value funds or whatever, 5 hedge funds and so forth. And you want to understand like, let's see if I can go to this Combined Portfolio Builder. Okay. Okay. So, and you want to find out kind of which ones are really popular. You can go over here and you can say like starboard value. I'm going to search, and here's starboard value. So I'm going to add that. Okay. And somebody said Citadel. So I'm going to add Citadel. I'm going to search for Citadel, and here's Citadel Advisors. Okay. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to return to my combined portfolio. And what happens is that now we've got a situation where we can actually see what are the common companies that are owned by Citadel and Starboard Value. If I go through here and I look and I sort this by, let me move this chat window up, by the current owners, is a follow-up on the 13th question. So the way to do it is to manually know that what the funds say. Yeah, I mean, that would basically be it. If you took Vanguard and you put it in a spreadsheet and then you went through and you looked at all the other filings like I just did and identified all the Vanguard funds, you know, you could subtract those out. We would like to be able to do that ourselves and provide that because if people ask that question, but we're not there yet. So let's get back to this combined portfolio. You know, Citadel Advisors and Starboard Value, what are the common holdings that they have? Well, I'm going to sort this by current owners, and what it turns out that both of them own, you know, SPY. That's no surprise, right? It's a market ETF. They also both own Corteva and iShares Russell 2000 and eBay and Textron. So that's kind of cool. I can continue to add more of these if I wanted to, and then ultimately zero down on the companies that are most popularly held. You can also see things like the change in owners. Both of these guys, well, I shouldn't say both of these guys. Let me go to one of these kind of pre-built ones that I have. I have this kind of like emerging markets. Okay, I went through all of the mutual funds and ETFs in the Fintel database, and I found all the funds that had emerging markets in the name. So if I go click on here, and I can go down to the bottom of this page. Here's all the emerging market funds that I found in our database, and I added them all to this combined portfolio. I'm going to go all the way to the very top again. And if you have an interest in emerging markets, then what this tells you is that of all those funds, the most popular company is a mainland Chinese company. This is 0700. This is a Tencent Holdings. It's not the ADR. 26 of the emerging markets funds own this. Prior to this last quarter, 25 owned it, so one added. How do you get support? If you look down in the lower right-hand corner here, there's a question mark on this blue circle. That will give you a ticket that will take you to our ticketing system. If you have a specific problem with using Fintel on your laptop, then we can solve that problem. If you have a larger question that's like what you're asking right now, then you can go to, you know, we have a message board in here. You can go to here, and you can go to Teams, and then you can go to the welcome group here. And I try to be on here every day and answer questions here. So if you have a question that you think the rest of the community might enjoy, then I would say come over here and ask that question, and we'll see if we can answer it. But back to the emerging markets. What I like to find is what stocks are people accumulating. So rather than searching by current owners, I sort by change in owners, and I can see that of all of our emerging markets ETF funds, this company, Naspers, which I have no idea what company this is, 4 of the funds bought this in the last quarter. In fact, all of these 4 here were accumulated in the last quarter. Now, so if I'm looking around for stocks to buy that are being accumulated by funds, then this is a really good tool for that. Obviously, it would be fun to be able to put this in the stock screener, and we will, but until then, this is a good opportunity for you to be able to do part of your research. I went ahead and tried to create some other like US small cap value. So these are kind of pre-built, canned portfolios. If I want to look at the change in ownership here, this shows you who's getting sold. This shows you who's getting accumulated. First Horizon National Corp. I have no idea what they are, but 5 funds accumulated that in the last quarter. Okay. Any questions about this? With combined portfolio, can you save your selection for ongoing future use? Yes, you can do that. In fact, these funds here, all of these ones here are the ones that I created. If you go to the combined portfolio builder and you add your list, you can actually click save here and you can give it a name, and then it will show up in your list here. Now, the original source of this, the original idea behind this was this kind of like hedge fund holdings tracker. And we take the entire 13F universe and we put it all on one page. Now, this is a kind of a page that's really heavy, and in many cases, it's a browser crashing page. But this takes the entire universe of our database, and there's, probably 15,000 companies in here. And it will show you in the entire universe, like who's buying and who's selling. So this is sorted by change in owners. Facebook is the big winner for this last quarter, with 515 new owners in Facebook. Tesla, the next one, and then further on down. Now this guy here, Brookfield Renewable Corporation Class A subordinate voting shares, he has 412 new owners, but he had 0 before. This is probably an IPO, and this is probably the first time. So you're not going to get quite as much value out of that number. But it's pretty interesting here. Like you can see who's getting accumulated and who's not. You can also look at things like change in shares. You can sort by other stuff. But this is really, for me, for the money, the most interesting column over here. Any questions about this? Okay. Let's see what time is it. It's 9:53. I guess we can call it a day at that point. We've covered the stock screener. I hope I answered all your questions. You can see that it's killing my browser now, so I'm going to get off this page. Just because there's so much data in it that it basically runs out of memory. Okay, so the sessions are recorded. This is going to be on our Fintel YouTube page within an hour or two. If you just go to Google and search for YouTube and Fintel, you'll see that we have all the past webinars and some old tutorials that I created. I'm glad you like this. I think this is my 5th one. I feel like I'm getting a little bit better at it, and I'm glad to have you guys here. I always want to try to help out when I can, and thanks for being here. Are the data columns predefined? Yes, they are predefined. I'm going to go ahead and close it up right now. Thank you all for showing up. I really appreciate it. I have a lot of fun with this, and hopefully I'll see you guys on Fintel in the message board, and I'll be doing this again probably I think the next one's scheduled will be the introduction to Fintel data, and I think in about 3 weeks, okay? All right, you guys, take care.